Hello everyone, my name is Brian. I am a developer from Florida, and today we're going to go over the test-driven development project QuoteKeeper. Our key concept for today is future tests. What this means is that we're going to use some test-driven development techniques in order to create a test for one specific feature of an application called QuoteKeeper. Let's go ahead and begin. Here I am in our QuoteKeeper project. Let's go ahead and read the instructions. So in this project, you will write a feature test for the development of a web application that allows users to save and display a collection of their favorite quotes. We will call this app QuoteKeeper. QuoteKeeper should allow users to enter the following information about each quote they would like to save to the application: the quote itself, who the quote is attributed to, and the source of the quote, let it be a book, article, speech, in real life. Because this course is focused on tests at the top level of TDD testing pyramid, this project will only cover the future test process up to the point of getting an error about the exercise phase of your test suite. In order to progress, we would need to drop down to the server layer of the testing pyramid, which is covered in another course. The completed form of this project will have a future test suite that is ready to move on to tests at the server level. The steps below will guide you through the process of using TDD to write a future test for the QuoteKeeper web application. After you complete each step, run your test suite in the terminal to see the result of your test and evaluate what code to write next in response to the message. Let's move on to step number 1. So step number 1, the overall scope of our testing suite is that we need to test behavior that happens when a user visits our project root, which will be the homepage of our website. In the file user-visits-root-test.js, write a describe block with a docstring that states the context that you will be testing your feature in, followed by an empty callback function. So here I am, and I am going to write a describe block. So what's happening now is that the user is visiting the root. No parameters. And that is now complete. I'm going to save, and we're going to move on to step number 2. Nest a second describe block with a docstring that states what features you're testing, followed by an empty callback function. So we're going to write another describe block. I will just copy and paste just to save time. But right now, instead of the user visiting the root, what we're doing is that we're going to post a quote. Once I'm in the web page, as a user, I would like to post a new quote. So post quote. Let's move on to step number 3. Inside the empty callback function, add an it block with a docstring that describes the desired behavior of the feature you're testing, followed by an empty callback function. So inside our second describe block, we're going to write an it block. And what the user is trying to do now is that he is going to save the quote that is submitted. The description can be anything you guys want. That's just the wording that I choose. So let's create that empty callback function. All right. All right, now we're going to move on to step number 4. So in the next step, you will need to have a quote to use as an example in writing your test. The information you will need is the quote itself, who the quote is attributed to, and the source of the quote. For example, you can read here the quote itself, who is attributed to, and the source. We have provided you a link here where you can see a couple of Bruce Lee's quotes, but I'm going to use the ones here in this example in order to save time and not browse to another tab. Now let's go ahead and move on to step number 5. Step number 4 is just picking your quote. Step number 5 is to set up inside the callback function for the it block, set up the 3 constant variables that you will use to mimic the user's response to each of the inputs fields we are testing for. So set each of the variables to a string based on the example quote you choose in the previous step. The variables names should be quote, attributed, and source. So let's go ahead and say that. So constant quote. And once again, this is the quote that you pick. I will go ahead and use this one right here in step number 4, but you can browse on the Bruce Lee link or just any quote that you like. Now let's move on to the constant attributed. And for me, that would be Marianne Williamson. And finally, the source of that quote. And for me, the source is A Return to Love. Right, so now that is done. And we're going to move on to step number 6. So we're going to use the global browser variable to set the URL of our test browser to the root of our project by calling .url and passing it an argument of a slash. So we're using the global browser, and on it we're calling URL, and the argument will be a slash. Moving on to step number 7, we are going to fill in the contents of the quote by telling our browser to set the value of a particular text area element. To do so, we're going to call browser.setValue with text area, and we add with the ID quote, followed by the quote variable that I created earlier. So browser dot set value. So set value takes 2 arguments. The first one is where you're going to set it, and the second one is what you're going to set. So where we're going to set the value is in a text area that has an ID of quote, and the whole thing goes in quotations. And what I am going to set inside of that text area is my variable quote from the previous step. All right, let's move on to step number 8, where we are going to call set value on the global browser variable to set the value of an input element with an ID attributed and my constant attributed. So I'm going to copy and paste this here, and instead of a text area, this is actually an input, and instead of quote, it's attributed, and so will the variable. attributed. There we go. Make sure to have proper spelling. As you can see, I'm struggling a little bit with that. So let's move on to step number 9, where we're going to call the set value on the global browser variable. And this time we're going to set the input element with ID source with our source variable. So once again, input, instead of attributed, we're using source. And instead of passing attributed, we're going to pass source. All right. So now for step number 10, we're going to call click on the global browser variable and pass it an argument with an input with the type submit. So once again, browser. And we're going to pass click with an input type submit. Right, so far our test, it's going to search for a text area with an ID quote, and it's going to set the value to our variable quote here. And it will do the same for the input attributed with our variable attributed. It will do the same thing for the input with ID source. It will set it to our variable source, and then it will click an input that has the type of submit. Perfect. So now we're going to move on to step number 11, where we're going to verify. So we're going to write 3 assert statements to verify that the substring of each of your 3 constant variables from the setup phase of your test are included in the string that is made up of all the text from the elements with ID quotes. So let's begin. We're going to assert include browser get text with the ID quote. So here what we're saying is make sure with assert, we're going to make sure that browser get text with the ID quote. So wherever I have an ID quote, make sure that the text that you grab includes quote, which is again the variable we created on top. So we're going to repeat that 3 times for attributed and for source. Attributed. Source and source. Let's move on to step number 12. So step number 12 says that eventually we will want to verify that once the user submits their data, it will be sent to the server and then be accessible in the browser inside of a div with ID quotes and name quotes. In our index.html, in this course, you are only dealing with the tasks at the top level of the testing pyramid. So the final step in this project will be writing the necessary HTML code in index.html to get the test to pass until the point of receiving an assertion error about the exercise phase. Now go to your HTML file. So let me save my test right here before I move on. And it's telling us that we need a div with ID quotes in plural and name quotes in plural as well. And we're going to close that, close our div. Okay, let's save. All right, so now it's telling me to run my tests. Give it a minute. Perfect. So it's telling us that it is failing, and it's telling me right here, an element could not be located on the page using the given search parameters, text area with ID quote. So as our step 13 says, I'm not sure if I read it or not, but run your test suite and fix each error you receive one at a time, focusing on the feedback about the HTML that the test is expected. Input and text area elements should be given both name and ID attributes with the same value. And we're going to address each error by creating the necessary element in our HTML page until you reach the assertion error concerning your exercise phase, which will propel you to move down to the server level test. So let's go ahead and fix this error. And we are going to create the text area that our test is searching for with the ID quote and the name quote. Right, so remember to save your HTML every time. And now we're going to rerun the test. And as you can see here, my test failed one more time. However, this time, the element that cannot be located it's the input with ID attributed. So let's go ahead and create that input. Remember to save your HTML. Rerun the test. And now we get another error. An element could not be located on the page using the given search parameters, input with ID of source. So let's grab that same input that we had earlier, and I'm just going to change it to source. Save. Rerun my test. And now we have an element could not be located in the page using the given search parameters. And as you can see here, it says click input type submit. So let's do that. Input with a type submit. Save and rerun our test. All right, and here you see that we have a totally new error, which is that expected to include our deepest fears, not, etc. That's my quote. It could be your quote. So at this point, this is the server level test that the instructions is saying that it is covered in another lesson. As you can read from the beginning, we knew that this was going to happen. Here, the completed form of this project will have a future test suite that is ready to move on our tests at the server level. So we have completed this project successfully. I hope you guys were able to understand why test-driven development it's pretty useful and convenient. It allows you to write your tests before you start to code, and once you code, it's a lot easier for you to not only make sure that everything works properly, but it's easier for you to know where your errors are, and that way your code is written basically to pass your test. So if you know that your code passes your test, you know that your code is good. And once again, my name was Brian. Happy coding, guys.